It's my pleasure and honor to introduce to you His Excellency Karim Kawar, who has been appointed Ambassador of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan to the United States of America and the Republic of Mexico on July 1st, was sworn into office by His Majesty King Abdullah II bin al-Hussein on July 8th of this year. Prior to his posting in Washington, Mr. Kawar served as a member of the Economic Consultative Council by appointment of His Majesty and served as a member of several task forces on investment, e-government, public sector reform, as well as computer and English education. Mr. Kawar served as chairman of the Information Technology Association of Jordan, called INTAJ, and led the national initiative for establishing Jordan's IT industry, known as the REACH Initiative. Having graduated from Boston College in 1987 with a B.S. in Management, Finance, and Computer Science, as an entrepreneur, he established his first company at the age of 20 and headed the Ideal Group, encompassing 10 companies specializing in systems integration, communication, internet services. He was selected as an Eisenhower Fellow for the year 2000. He is a founding member of several business associations and NGOs, among which are the Jordan American Business Association, the Young Entrepreneurs Association, and the Jordanian Intellectual Property Association. He also served as Vice Chair of the Jordan River Foundation, chaired by Her Majesty Queen Rania. The foundation empowers women through its income-generating projects, business development services for micro-entrepreneurs, as well as preventing child abuse. Just on a personal note, I would just like to say how grateful we are to have you here, Mr. Ambassador. There has been a long tradition of good relations between Brigham Young University and Jordan. We have a formal academic agreement with the University of Jordan. We've co-sponsored a number of exchanges, faculty-student exchanges, conferences in Jordan, at which the University of Jordan faculty and BYU faculty have participated. And also we've been involved in a number of humanitarian projects, including the River Jordan Foundation and the Soldiers Family Welfare Society and a number of others in the country of Jordan as well. And there are a lot of students who have been there, and we have quite a contingent of Jordanian students and alumni association that's quite extensive in Jordan. So we feel strong ties. So let me, in the Arabic tradition, say ahla wa sahla bik. You're among friends and in a place of peace and security, and we're grateful to have you here. شرفنا بوجودك اليوم.
Thank you, Vice President Peterson, distinguished guests. It's a great honor to be here today. Duma and I enjoyed our flight coming into Salt Lake City. We had to wake up early, getting up at 5 in the morning. In Jordan, it's a bit different because the sun would have just started to rise at 5 in the morning this time of the year. Here it was pitch dark. And I was reminded on the way by a story of this young man just leaving church where the preacher was shaking hands with all of those that attended. So once he saw him, he shook his hand and he said, "Son, you should join the Lord's army." And he said, "But sir, I am in the Lord's army." I said, "Well, how come I only see you on Christmas and Easter?" He said, "Well, I'm in the Secret Service." And so I wanted to share with you just a few remarks about what I have been doing and my posting here in Washington. When I accepted, things were very different. They were much more quiet. Now it's very busy for me, and just keeping up with what's happening has been taking a lot of time away from my family. But it's in the spirit of challenge that we work in Washington. I've been involved in Jordan with many initiatives that I thought I would just share with you some of those. 3 years ago, 28 business associations came together and they said, we want to plan Jordan's future. So we've put together a document called Jordan Vision 2020. It's significant because this is the private sector coming together saying this is where we want to be in 20 years. And that focused on one key objective, which is doubling the per capita income in Jordan. Jordan is a small country of 5 million people. It's slightly larger than New Jersey, but it's also limited in its natural resources. Its biggest resource is its human capital, which we are investing in and capitalizing on. This document set out 7 strategies, one of which is embracing globalization. For Jordan to survive and to thrive, we have to be part of this global community. And in this, we sought to join the World Trade Organization. Now, many of you remember His late Majesty King Hussein of Jordan, who ruled over the country for 47 years, and he left us a legacy of peace and prosperity for the Jordanians. That legacy continues through the young King Abdullah, who just turned 40. And in this, he focused more on education as well. He said, where we want to be, we need to have all the talents. Therefore, in our WTO accession, we had big challenges, and we knew that time was running out. So we managed to join in the shortest time possible. That took us less than 9 months, in which we had to look at a lot of legislation reform. Speaking of reform, we have many going on at the same time. We have economic reform, we have social reform, as well as educational reform. The other initiatives that I would just mention, the REACH initiative, which is developing an IT industry in Jordan. We've based that on the experiences of others. So this is sometimes the advantage of being a latecomer, that you can look at other countries' experiences and you can build on those. And sometimes we ask the odd questions, meeting, for example, with the former president of Costa Rica. We said, where has Costa Rica failed, and what would you have done to avoid those failures? So we only not learn from the successes of others, but also in avoiding their failures. I would also mention 2 major initiatives, which are e-government and e-learning. In the new Jordan, we want to embrace technology, and e-government is one of those where we believe that a smaller government is a more efficient one, where offering services 24 hours a day would be of service to the citizens and the businesses, and this would improve the efficiency and productivity of government. So this is sort of the business approach to running government. E-learning, more importantly, is switching a fundamental of moving away from teaching and focusing more on learning, saying there's so much knowledge out there. How you get to it and what you make of it is more important than what you might be learning, which is what you're being taught, which might be 5 or 10 years old by the time it reaches the classroom. And harnessing that knowledge is very important in meeting the challenges that we face today. In this respect, a primary focus for the whole country is competitiveness. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Michael Porter model on competitiveness, but basically it goes on to say that you need to create an environment that relies on certain fundamentals, that is having the demand and that requests certain products or services to be offered, plus having a cluster. So it's not just one organization, but looking at the whole industry. So looking at, for example, the models used are shoemaking in Italy, which makes that industry so competitive, or car manufacturing in Germany. So in Jordan, we're looking at such areas and saying what makes the environment in Jordan more competitive. And we're looking at what's called the Global Competitiveness Ranking Index. This includes some 75 countries. Jordan ranks in the low 40s. And this is now we're being challenged by our leader to say we want to reach the 20s. What does it take to get there? What sort of reforms do we have to embrace and changes that have to be made? And realizing that in this race, everybody else is running. Jordan has to run twice as fast in order to get ahead of the pack. In recognition of what Jordan has been doing, Jordan was the fourth country to sign a free trade area agreement with the United States, which recognizes the reforms that Jordan has been doing, but also gives us the support that is needed to develop Jordan as a model country. Our exports to the U.S. have grown by as much as 60% over last year. This is significant. Our economy has grown despite the regional tension at 4.2% this year. So this has been as a result of the FTA and another agreement called the QIZs. But here, what's important to say that the U.S. market for Jordan has been replacing some of the regional markets in the top export destination. I'd like to touch a bit about what hinders my mission. Here, I focus on two main issues for me, in addition to maintaining the strong diplomatic relations that we have between our two countries. I'm focused on increasing Jordanian exports to the U.S., as well as increasing U.S. investments in Jordan. But my mission is hindered by the regional tension. I look at the peace process, and although we've covered a lot of ground in the past and we got so close to reaching an agreement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, that over the past 2 years, many hopes have been erased. Still, we feel that hope is there. 22 Arab nations back in March presented the Arab Peace Initiative, and this is a significant one. It has proved its resilience. Those are 22 Arab nations extending an olive branch to Israel, accepting Israel as a nation in the region, and accepting, most importantly, to normalize relations. This also brings end to the conflict and a settlement to the refugee issue. This initiative was not properly marketed due to the tension that started in March. But yet, the quartet, which is made up of 4 groups, the United States, the United Nations, the EU, and Russia, has adopted the recommendations of the Arab Peace Initiative. And the President has committed to a key component of that initiative, which is a 2-state solution, back in his June 24th address. This is very important for us in also recognizing the legitimate rights of the Palestinians to have their state. It's very important for the Palestinians to have hope. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to establish peace. It is also important in defining the end game. So we know that we will have a 2-state solution in 3 years. This is what President Bush has committed to. But how do we get there? It's very clear that this is needed for both parties to work towards. Today there is a work plan in the making, and hopefully it will be publicized in the coming 2 weeks. This roadmap focuses on 3 stages. The first is the humanitarian, security, and reform phase. Humanitarian issue today, 70% of Palestinians live on less than $2 a day. Those are people that have been stranded in their homes. There are wounded people that can't make it to hospitals because of roadblocks, and this has to be eased. Security for the Israelis is also important, and this is where a lot of effort supported by the U.S. as well as Jordan and Egypt to rebuild some of the security forces in the Palestinian territories. And the third is reform of the security of the Palestinian Authority, which is underway. Phase 2 talks about a provisional state, a provisional Palestinian state, and an international conference to move forward. And phase 3 will focus on the permanent settlement negotiations. I would like to maybe touch on the hot issue that we're all concerned with, which is the war on Iraq. And here I would say that we're, of course, very concerned about this issue. For us, war should be the last resort and not the first option. And we're very comforted by the President's speech of 2 days ago when he stated that war could be avoidable. We're trying, as Jordan, to avert a strike on the region, and that can only be done by Iraq's compliance with United Nations security resolutions. It's very important to have the inspection regime back in. Those are the experts that can testify whether Iraq does have weapons of mass destruction and to what level that program has reached. For us, a war in the region could be very destabilizing. We don't know, when a war is started, we don't know who else will be engaged in the war, how far this war will reach, how many lives will be lost, and how much it will cost. For us today, a contained Iraq under Saddam's regime is far better than a disintegrated Iraq, which will cause a lot of turbulence. For us, Jordan, of course, sits between Iraq and the hard place. And we will stand to be greatly affected by this war. It will have a political effect, but more importantly, it will have an economic effect. Jordan will suffer as a result, and this is where it's very important for us to try to find a peaceful resolution to the problem. And we're trying as much as we can in this respect. In closing, I would like to, and this is to give more time for questions and answers, I'd like to restate that Jordan has a strategic and economic relationship with the U.S. that it will not jeopardize. Therefore, it's very important for us in Jordan to build on this relationship. And in closing, I'd like to focus on a few areas that I think are not being addressed enough. It's very important for us today to find what's in common between Eastern and Western cultures, rather than to focus on the differences. We share many of the values and principles between our two cultures, and it's important to build on those commonalities rather than to build on the differences. It's very important in the region to maintain hope for peace, hope for a better future, where people cherish their lives and work towards improving their livelihood. That cannot be done without creating jobs. Therefore, for us in Jordan in specific, we are focused on creating jobs. Jobs, and not just labor jobs, but also we're trying to build a knowledge-based economy where we have high-paying jobs that will have a tremendous effect on the whole society. And finally, this region will not have a future without peace. So we hope that we all join forces to build peace for the Middle East. Thank you very much.
The ambassador has consented to take a few questions, so please, from the audience. We're preparing a microphone so people can hear. Ambassador, perhaps I could ask the first question while this is being passed around. You mentioned that containing Saddam Hussein is a much better outcome for Jordan than a disintegrating Iraq. Could you expound on that a little bit? What's so frightening about the potential of disintegrating Iraq?
Well, not just for Jordan, but for the region. As you know, in Iraq there are three primary groups. There are the Kurds in the north, the Sunnis in the center, and the Shiites in the south. And today they've all been living under one state, which is Iraq. A disintegrated Iraq would mean 3 states. This, of course, creates problems, not just for Jordan, but for countries such as Turkey, which would be concerned with a Kurdish republic in the north, and for Saudi Arabia or for Iran with a Shiite state in the south. So this is what I meant by saying a disintegrated Iraq would be problematic, and it's very important that, for me, regime change will set a precedent. Other countries will take advantage of this and will say, well, we don't like the regime of that country and we want to change it as well. But again, President Bush has clarified that Saddam's regime can embark on a regime change by accepting the UN inspectors back and accept disarmament. And we're happy about that, and we hope that that channel would be pursued. But for us, it's very important to maintain the integrity and the sovereignty of the country, which is Iraq.
In your report, is that the plan? Sorry.
You discussed the plan that the Arab nations have made for establishing peace between specifically Israel and Palestine. How is that plan being accepted by both sides, by Israel and Palestine? In your view, how willing are they to engage in these processes and really establish a peaceful 2 states?
Thank you for the question. Concerning the Palestinians, of course, have accepted that Arab Peace Initiative. The 22 nations, you'd be surprised of some of the signatories. Iraq is one of them. Libya is one of them. And the resilience of the Arab Peace Initiative is none of those countries have withdrawn their signatures despite the uprising and the escalation of conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians. So it has been resilient, and we believe that it still has a chance. Unfortunately, until this day, Prime Minister Sharon has not publicly announced that he accepts a 2-state solution. And it's very important for us to call on the Israeli government to accept the President's commitment to the solution to the Middle East problem.
Mr. Ambassador, the Kingdom of Jordan plays a crucial role in the Middle East. Jordan is one of the few nations who has a peace treaty with Israel. What steps is Jordan taking in influencing American policy and Israel at the same time to bring about the creation of an independent state in Palestine and also bring the security needs for the Israelis that they need? So what is your answer?
Thank you. Regarding Jordan is playing a key role. Of course, Jordan has maintained its diplomatic relations with Israel, despite the call of the masses in Jordan to end those relations. But we believe it was important. One, we're not a country that backs down from its commitments, and our commitment to peace is serious. Two, Jordan is a channel to the Palestinian territories. So through Jordan, a lot of medical aid and humanitarian aid and food supplies have been channeled to many major cities in the Palestinian territories. We're hoping that also Jordan's peace treaty with Israel becomes a model for others. So the Arab Peace Initiative also calls on a comprehensive peace, so that calls for the end of the Syrian-Israeli conflict as well as the Lebanese-Israeli conflict. The U.S. has been responsive to the needs of the Arab nations. But of course, there needs to be more emphasis, and this administration has unfortunately been entertaining some of Israel's demands, and in some cases it was Prime Minister Sharon standing in defiance of the President's requests, for example, when it was back in March for the immediate withdrawal from Ramallah. That actually took several weeks, and it's been in and out since. Again, the last siege on President Arafat, also it required U.S. intervention for Prime Minister Sharon to respond. It's very important that for both parties to control their response. We certainly do not believe that conflict will result in peace or the use of military force. Therefore, we as Jordan call on both the Palestinians and Israelis to avert or to not use force in any way. And it's also, since Israel is in the more powerful position, Israel should also restrain and should control its response to Palestinian actions. And certainly the Palestinian Authority has to be more in control of the various factions within Palestine and what they do in Israel.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. My question is, how open would Jordan be to embracing a more democratic state?
Jordan, well, first of all, we have to look here at democracy. I personally do not believe that there is one form of democracy that's applicable to all nations around the world. And Jordan, since '89, has reinstated a parliamentary democracy. So we've had 3 elections since. Now the parliament is in recess, and we're having our next elections in the spring of next year. This is an 80-seat parliament. Today there is a new law that has been put into effect which expands the representation, so we'll go up to 108 seats in the parliament, in the lower house. We also have an upper house who are appointed by the king. This is probably similar to the UK, where you have a House of Commons and the House of Lords, where the Lords are appointed and not elected. Jordan, of course, believes in democracy, but again, we believe that we can shape our own democracy. And this actually leads me to another issue. And sometimes what we are presented with is the best case scenario for Iraq, for example. That, okay, Saddam's regime would change and all of a sudden we're going to have democracy in Iraq. Well, democracy is not something that you can inject into people, using a syringe. It's going to take time to build democratic societies. I believe that democracy is about sharing responsibility. It's very important for us to bring up generations that accept the challenge of sharing responsibility and living up to their democratic responsibilities. So democracy is not as easy as it sounds.
Mr. Ambassador, some countries have considered globalization a threat to cultural identity and nationalism. How does Jordan's new focus on globalization and trade with the West affect regional relations with other Arab nations?
Thank you. Jordan was the 134th country to accede to the WTO. And back then, those 133 countries were trading amongst them 93% of the world trade. So for us, it was a simple decision. Do we want to be one of the 7%, and that was prior to China's accession, or do we want to be one of the 93%? In terms of globalization, of course, there were many fears by Jordanians of saying, here we're going to open our market to foreign products, that's going to kill our local industry, that's going to destroy whatever potential we have. And it has proven otherwise. that Jordan can embrace globalization and capitalize on it and take advantage of it. That openness and that open market approach has opened for Jordanian manufacturers and service providers all markets of the world. Jordan, in addition to its free trade area agreements with the United States, we have an EU partnership agreement. We also have the Arab Free Trade Area Agreement. We have the European Free Trade Area Agreement, which are the countries that are outside of the EU. And in all of those cases, Jordan can trade freely or with certain schedules that will take effect over the coming years in terms of reduction of tariff. But I'll take an example which has been close to my heart, which is intellectual property rights. Coming from the software industry, it was very important for us to protect our own intellectual production. And this was, of course, we were confronted by those who said, no, your mere interests are to protect American software firms because they are the ones who want to sell software into Jordan. Well, one, we cannot have double standards. We cannot protect Jordanian intellectual property and not protect other intellectual property. But it's more importantly, we believe that a need can lead to creation of software. So, for example, if companies are restricted from pirating software, and there is a need for certain software that has to fit the culture and the local requirements, then this can create a whole class of companies in Jordan that can cater to that need, and they can develop their own software. And this is where today Jordan is taking a leading position in becoming a software provider for the whole Middle East region. We're talking about a population among the Arab world of 300 million people. So this is a large market. It is the fastest growth area in terms of its ICT growth, information and communication technologies. So Jordan can benefit from that. Looking at the pharmaceuticals industry, there are medications that are protected by patents, but patents expire after 17 years. So Jordan has become also a center for developing out-of-patent software, which are the medications, which are generic medications. But also we've seen some development of new medications together with American counterparts. So the protection of intellectual property is one of those key components. Protection of the environment, of labor rights, those are all important to us, and we don't see that those are bad when it comes to globalization.
You mentioned the importance of investment from the United States in Jordan, and I was just wondering, what are some of the main forms that this investment takes?
Well, there are many opportunities in Jordan. We've seen investments, for example, in the tourism industry. We've seen investments in many of the privatization programs. Jordan has embarked on a privatization policy that takes away government-owned companies and transferring them into the private sector. And this is where it has been a key attraction for many investors in looking at utilities, for example. So one example was Jordan Telecom, which is our national PTT that has been privatized. And France Telecom has been a major investor there. They've invested about $508 million to acquire 40% of the shares, and that was 2 years ago. Today, Jordan Telecom is going for its IPO, and thus it can attract even further investors. There are opportunities in the energy sector. There are many there in the minerals industry. We have many American firms investing there in the transportation industry. So there are many opportunities, but also in the services area, there are also opportunities there. Utilizing Jordanian talent to serve the region as a whole would be also key.
Someone else have a question?
I just had a quick question. Has Jordan had any involvement in the war on terrorism, and what is that involvement?
Jordan, actually, His Majesty the King was on a flight to the U.S. on September 11th. His plane was redirected to Canada. He was supposed to address a group of students at Rice University in Houston. His plane was diverted to Canada and he flew back to Jordan. And back then, at the start of the event, nobody knew what was happening. But when we later found out, Jordan was the first country in the Middle East actually to support the U.S. in its war on terrorism. Jordan has been a victim of terrorism. We've had attacks that were plotted by Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. And Jordan has been also a key provider of inside information on Al-Qaeda and how they plan their attacks. And on this issue, I believe that Islam as a religion has been targeted in the war on terrorism, not by the administration, but as a reaction by the people. And it's very important here to note that Islam is a religion that promotes peace and love and does not endorse any such acts. So the killing of innocent civilians is not endorsed by any religion. And it's very important to separate that. Those are people that are hijacking religion and should not be allowed to do so. Jordan also supports direct efforts by providing field hospitals in Afghanistan. So we have our people there, and Jordan is one of the largest providers of peacekeeping forces with the United Nations in many regions of the world. So therefore, we believe that the war on terrorism is not just led by the U.S. It's all countries around the world in the Middle East. If you would recall, many years ago, under the Clinton administration, Egypt held one of the first conferences on terrorism, which was attended by President Clinton, and this was when terrorism was local. It was Egyptian tourist sites that were targeted by terrorists. Buses were being blown up of just terrorists visiting the region. And Jordan has managed to actually defuse some of those plans, but we were targeted also for the Millennium celebrations in December of '99. So we're very serious about the fight on terrorism, and it requires a lot of collaboration between all countries concerned with this.
Earlier you talked about a contained Iraq being important to Jordan, and I was just wondering what resources and amount of responsibility Jordan is willing to commit to as a part of that containment of Iraq.
Jordan, there was talk, for example, of in the media of using Jordanian bases to launch an attack on Iraq, and I think it's very important here to say that Jordan will not allow for anyone to use its bases to launch any war or any attack on any of its neighbors. And therefore we call for a peaceful resolution to all those problems. In terms of the containment of Iraq, we're not doing anything other than providing advice. Jordan presents the sound of reason in the region. We believe we are the oasis of peace in a desert of turmoil, and it's very important for us to convey what actually would be the effects of war, what would be the effects of a regime change, and the importance of having inspectors go back to Iraq, and also putting the responsibility on the Iraqi regime. Now there is a campaign in Jordan called Jordan First. We can only do so much to avert war, but at the end of the day, we have to worry about Jordan. And the Iraqi regime is responsible for allowing the UN inspectors back in.
Do you foresee Jordan as taking an increased role in leadership, in particular the Middle East and the world in general?
We hope so, through establishing a model country. We believe that Jordan can be a model for other countries in the region, being, for example, adopting technology, and not just for the sake of technology, but the sake of improving the society as a whole, of being able to trade with all countries around the world, to have peace with all our neighbors, and to have good relations with the West. We believe it's important to have it as such. I believe that Jordan has established also credibility. So we have many world leaders that listen to our king because of his hands-on approach to problems in the region. We believe that we contribute in adding a perspective from the region. So it's very important for anyone making decisions to look at all sides and their views. And we hope that Jordan can continue to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for coming.
We'll take this question and one final question in the back, and then we'll need to cut it off.
Thank you. I know in past, nomadic pastoralists have been given incentives to sedentarize, and I'm wondering what Jordan is doing currently to protect this valuable and endangered culture and resource for using the wastelands of the desert and whatnot that the nomads can give. What is currently being used?
Nomads, I believe you refer to our Bedouin part of population. Jordan is 70% desert, and we have a small part of our population, which is probably less than 2%, that are nomads. They are Bedouins. They roam around not just Jordan, but the region. They move into Saudi Arabia, into Iraq and Syria, and they are mainly shepherds. They have herds of sheep and goats. And in this respect, I remember when I did my military service for 2 years in boot camp, we used to always look forward to just getting that one day off, which would be Friday in Jordan. And all of us, there were about 200 in that group, we all just wanted to go home, except that one guy who would not. He said, "No, I'm happy to stay here." I said, "Well, why are you staying? Don't you want to go to your family?" He says, "Well, my family, dropped me off, and I won't be able to meet them until a year later." So he used to do time for us. But certainly, Jordan takes environment very seriously. It's very important to maintain an eco-balance. For example, we're focusing today on ecotourism, where we're trying not to affect. Jordan has many also heritage sites, some biblical sites. If you're familiar with Petra, that's one of our treasures. But also Jordan is home to the baptismal site, which Pope John Paul II has visited and endorsed. Also the site where John the Baptist was beheaded, among many other Christian, Muslim, and Jewish sites. So in addition to that, we try to preserve as many as we can. There are over 75,000 archaeological sites in Jordan. It is coined as an open-air museum, and we try to preserve as much as we can.
Yes. My question is, with increased trade in the United States, does Jordan fear an infiltration of Western media and entertainment, such as movies, books, music? I don't think it... Yeah.
That's a very important point. And an experiment has been a new radio station called Radio Sawa. Sawa in Arabic means together. and this is a station that has been focusing on music, playing one Western song followed by an Eastern song, and having very short focus on news. This station, which is part of the Voice of America, has actually probably taken over the number one station in terms of the number of listeners. In terms of Jordan has opened, it has opened up to international media many years ago, and therefore, you drive around the most rural parts of the country, and you will find even the smallest of houses have satellite reception dishes on top, and they can see any channel from around the world. This is very important for us, that Jordanians get to see whatever channels they want and whatever media they want, but more importantly, to be able for them to decide what is the truth versus what's being made up. And certainly having more credible media in the region is very important for the Middle East.
Yeah. Did I have one more? We do one more.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. My question is concerning the FTA agreement between America and Jordan and the implementation of the agreement. Do you see that taking place in the long or short term? And with all the intensity in the Middle East, do you see that happening ever even?
Well, the FTA will move on despite the conflict in the region, and this is where Jordan has broken away from its traditional trading partners. As I mentioned, the U.S. has taken over the number one export destination, replacing Iraq. So this is very important for us. The FTA took effect starting December 17th last year, so it's still new, relatively. There are schedules of which, until we reach an open and free market between the two countries, in the process we see a lot of many ventures taking advantage of the FTA. We see many Jordanian business people doing business with the U.S. and more American businesses interested in Jordan as a gateway to the region. Certainly, Jordan's FTA will also become a model for many other countries that are negotiating free trade area agreements, such as Morocco, Singapore, Chile, and many others.
We're grateful the Ambassador spent an hour with us this morning. Grateful for your attendance here as well. The Ambassador has a very tight schedule, but does have just a minute, so if there are any of you who would like to personally greet the Ambassador, we invite you to do that for just a minute before he has to move to his next appointment.